Welcome again. Now we are in the final episode of Season 2 of Offstage with Ward Anderson. I am your host, yours truly, and I am truly lucky today to be joined by some living legends when it comes to the topic that we're talking about today, which is the scope of where the music industry has come, vinyl to digital. In the span of a relatively short amount of time, we've watched music go through many different formats, and the industry has changed in many different ways. And with me are four people who know all about that. Sitting right next to me, he is the singer-songwriter frontman for the legendary Canadian band Glass Tiger. He's also the man behind the Action Sandwich. Please welcome Alan Frew.
Thank you.
She is a music journalist and broadcaster who has been heard and read all around the world. Her name is Kim Hughes. He has the unfortunate pleasure of being a good friend of mine. He is a music publicist, historian, and expert, the man to know if you want to know all about what to know. Please welcome that Eric Alper. A multiple award-winning and multi-platinum selling singer-songwriter who has been everything from a #1 artist to a #1 songwriter for other artists. Please welcome the legendary Dan Hill. Okay, my friends, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here. Let's talk about how far we've come in what may be a short amount of time.
I've come from Richmond Hill.
Richmond Hill.
So that's a very far.
Did you drive?
I did drive.
So it didn't take you that
I did
long.
drive.
It
But
didn't
you
take
know what? Just to be here, sitting next to Dan Hill and across from Alan, I mean, please.
Hey.
Like combined, like the amount of records we've sold combined on this sofa?
Millions.
40 million.
Millions.
40 million, easily.
You know what, and here's what's interesting also, two best-selling authors, both of you. Mm-hmm. So kudos to that.
Thank you.
You know, one of you a memoirist, a bit of a memoirist. The other one, a memoirist and motivational writer, I
Yeah,
guess you could
a
say.
little different, yeah.
Right? So now there's something, you know, starting out, both of you in the 70s, starting out, if someone had told you, you know, it's going to be really big for you one day, best-selling author, would you have believed that? Because, you know what, rock stars didn't write books.
Rockstar didn't read books.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Didn't write or read.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have believed it, no. I was so enveloped in my career in the 70s that I couldn't see outside it to imagine doing anything else. So it would have been a surprise to me.
Yeah.
And I was always a storyteller, but it was always like firsthand. So I probably wouldn't have believed you either if you'd have told me I was going to put it into a book.
Yeah. It's interesting to be sitting here talking to both of you because I've interviewed both of you on the radio before, sat here with you, and yet it feels so amazing to sit here with you on television doing this because let me talk about my relationship with both of you. When I was 13 years old, my brother went off to university and he left behind a bunch of albums. And
Oh, wow.
this vinyl, bad boy right here, was in his collection. And I had no idea who this guy was. Look at that crazy hair. Look at that right there.
Yeah.
So where's the close-up camera? All right. So Longer Fuse, your breakthrough, your big breakthrough, right?
What are you looking at? What are you looking at in that cover?
Actually, to be honest, I was looking at the other side of the bridge. I was down by around the Toronto Star building, and I had a photographer that would put me in all different situations and tell me all sorts of absurd things just to get an expression out of me. And I still remember him telling me something really, really wild and unusual in order to elicit that sort of that blank stare that I was so famous for in those days.
Yeah. What's great about this is I didn't know anything about you. I didn't know, there you go, vinyl, the fold out. Remember that? I didn't know anything about you. I didn't know anything about who this was. And I hadn't listened to this album. I just remember looking at it. And then I was watching an episode of SCTV where for some reason they played a snippet of Sometimes When We Touch. And they said that was Sometimes When We Touch by Dan Hill. And I went, I know that name. I know that name. And I went up and I discovered that I had this album and I listened to it. And of course, the big hit, Sometimes When We Touch, on this album. And, you know, days that are gone, generally. Having that vinyl album, holding it in your hand, holding it like this. I have a lot of these framed in my house and everything, you know. How does that, what kind of memories do you have seeing that? Somebody pulling out one of these like this. And this is an original. This isn't a reprint. You can see this is original Canadian press right there.
Well, it's sort of like a diary.
Yeah.
You know, records are like diaries. They're the precise periods of your life and what you were going through emotionally at that time. So when I look at that, I think of a time in my life and what I was going through at that time. And the songs take me right back to that period of 1977.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's true with you too, Alan, when you see an old vinyl.
Yeah, I notice it more with other albums, maybe. You know, when I look at an old Beatles, oh, jeez.
You think that was going to not happen?
When I look at an old Beatles album or something, and I loved the stories, that I loved opening it, I had to read every credit and look at every, you know, every detail.
It really was something. I mean, and by the way, I won't mention the hair because that was the 80s, but do you think the jumpsuit is going to make a comeback? The full jumpsuit?
For someone else, I hope, not for me.
I was told no jumpsuits for the taping, or else I would have worn mine.
You would have worn yours?
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
I'm wearing, the 80s have come back in a way. If you look at what I'm wearing, popular outfit in the 80s, popular outfit today, but not the full jumpsuit. That's the big hair and the
It's actually a leather jacket and leather pants. But
so good.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
but we do remember the jumpsuits.
Oh yeah. I wore a yellow jumpsuit at Maple Leaf Gardens the night we opened up for Boy George. And
But did you wear like yellow so you can stand out to the
yeah,
people
I mean,
in the back?
you know,
Mick Jagger
we had no money
used
or
to say
anything,
that too.
I requested two things. One, I want to wear yellow, and two, can I get a wireless microphone? Because that was a big deal to be able
Big
to
deal.
move around with a wireless microphone.
And then the record label said, yes, you can
They
have that.
called on
Here's
the Monday
$700,000 for the microphone
Yeah.
that you'll have to pay back one day.
Yeah, they signed us on the Monday after that.
You can tell the difference between musicians and comedians because I've done comedy shows where, as a joke, I drop the microphone onto the stage and it makes this thud kind of noise, kind of blah. And musicians are always the ones that go, "No!
Right.
What are you doing?"
Right, I know. We took it personally.
But you know what? There is something. You're so absolutely right. I mean, this album doesn't fold out, but you know, you would buy.
I think there's a liner notes on the inside. What's
Not
going
of
on
not
the
of this
inside?
one, not of this one, but some of them did.
Yeah, we did.
And I'll get to that in a second because I have something else to show you and to talk about. But I mean, the thing about you bought the album, you went home, you put it on your turntable, and you sat down, and you just sometimes, and if there were no liner notes or anything, you just stared at the cover, man, and you read little things like this. And you know, I think when vinyl became less popular, people stopped finding out who the producers were. Because there was something about you put on the music and you just studied the album, you just studied the cover, and maybe you did open it up and you could have lyrics or whatever in there.
You know, it's an interesting point, you know, and I'm sure Kim can either back me up on this or be completely opposite of it, depending on where she kind of grew up on. But I used to buy albums growing up based on who the record label was. And I found out by reading the liner notes. I knew about, you know, Motown and Muscle Shoals and all these amazing producers and the Wrecking Crew and all of these amazing people who played on records, following them, saying, oh, if Marvin Gaye's crew is using them on here, then it's got to be a great record. And I think that that's where some of the emotional attachments started to become lost, when record labels either stopped putting it on there, or when the CD happened and they said, you know what, too much for paper parts. So now we're just going to go to a 4-panel paper part instead of 16. And you got less of a relationship, you got less of the story involved with it. And I'm sure, you know, when you're critiquing or when you're trying to find information about why things are happening the way that they are, the less information, the more separation there almost is.
That's one aspect, but you know, something that comes up a lot when I speak with musicians, and certainly someone who, as a music consumer, that I found was kind of inherent with vinyl that's really been lost in the digital age where you can cherry pick singles, is the idea of sequencing. I mean, artists would put together an album in a very specific order. This track begins the album, this track follows this track, and it'll take you through. And not even, you can throw it out to the farthest extreme of concept albums, but I've never met an artist, and please speak to it, who didn't put an awful lot of time and energy into thinking about how the tracks were laid out.
You still do.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So of course now when people are able to just, pull this track here and pull this track here, it's kind of lost. They might get track 5 without the benefit of hearing track 4 before it. So that could be one reason too why we're seeing this comeback of vinyl. I mean, it's not just knuckle draggers replacing their worn out Pink Floyd. I mean, it's younger people buying, very contemporary music that they're excited by. And part of it could be they're going on this journey.
I think that was true. I think that people really did, and I think that you do, the two of you, think about the tracks and the sequences and things like that. But I think a lot of that is lost nowadays with digital music because it's a singles market again.
Absolutely.
And a lot of people aren't thinking of the order. In fact, what's more popular than anything is the single, and what's more popular than the album is the EP. More and more bands are just putting out EPs now because they're finding that everyone wants the singles more than anything in this digital world of get as many hits as you can on your phone or your iPod or what have you, right?
But I wonder how many young kids today are buying vinyl just simply because it's a cool object to have, and they're still not really caring about the sequencing or the story behind it. It's just like, I've got a 12-year-old daughter at home, and she'd look at an album just strictly because it's wacky or it's,
Well, there was an episode of the TV series Mad Men where the main character is not as up to date on music today, and it was the Beatles' Revolver. And somebody comes to, and his wife comes to him and says, "Here, I want you to listen to this." And she hands him a revolver, and she turns it over, and she puts it on the turntable, and she says, "I'd start with this one." And they did it for the plot of the TV show, but the song they started with was the last track on the B-side. And I went, never would have happened. In 1966 or whenever Revolver was, I was like, no, you put it on and you listen to side A track, side A song 1.
Right.
Right.
You know what I mean? You would not have gone, let's start with the last song on the B-side. No, because the Beatles recorded Revolver for you to listen to in a certain order.
Right.
Yeah, but even though that was true, I'm not sure. I think that we all have some romantic image of everybody doing this. No slight to either of you two, but I got into both of your catalog and your music based on singles.
Yeah.
You might have said, well, here's a question for you. Was there a song that you could think of that was off of the first album or the second album or Diamond Sun that sold hundreds of thousands of copies and millions of copies in Canada that wasn't a single that you thought, oh, they missed out on this one?
Well, yeah, I mean, I can think of more so sort of in my solo career, but I would think Glass Tiger kind of got it right, what the singles should have been, and they were.
Right, and I think that when we talk about being in a singles world now, where you don't get to record an album anymore unless you have 3 monster hits.
Well, that's really where it's cyclical, right? Because you came up in the late 70s, a time when it was still AOR, and you still had. I discovered you as an album artist, but that's also because I had the album.
Right.
Right. It was gifted down to me from a brother, so I had all of that. Right.
And people wouldn't gift you singles.
Right.
Right.
But I discovered you as a singles artist, as someone who grew up in the States.
Right.
Right. I had heard Glass Tiger, the singles. Right. So I discovered your music through the singles.
Right.
Right. Through. Are you ready for it?
That's hilarious.
This little thing. All right. Now, it's funny looking back at the short life of the cassette tape, if you think about it, right?
I can't believe it's coming back. I mean, there's some talk that it's coming back, and it's
Yeah,
just
there's some labels that do nothing but the cassettes now.
Do you know how exciting it was to get one of these, to spend your $10, and to get one of these, and it had all of that? This is considered a big deal. A cassette tape that has all these liner notes.
That's why so many people are wearing glasses these days.
Yeah.
Because they had to sit there and do this all
That
the
print
time.
is so small.
Well, I'll tell you a hilarious story with this. The girl that became my girlfriend and is now my wife, we were blind date. She heard of Glass Tiger, but she was over in Europe and it wasn't that big a deal. And she's going on this blind date, and they went out to buy Glass Tiger to try and check me out ahead of time so that if she didn't like it, she wasn't going to show up on the date. But this is what they bought. They didn't think to buy the vinyl. And they were faced with trying to figure out
Which tiny little guy?
Yeah,
which
yeah,
one?
and they were all pointing to Sam, saying, "I hope it's him."
and that's where that came from.
But I mean, this was as close as we came for a while to that vinyl experience. Because you know, I had lots of vinyl, but I'm of the cassette generation,
Yeah.
Generation X,
Right.
right? And so I spent a lot of time on the floor reading this, you know, when I bought the new
Yeah.
album. And of course, the difference was we did most of our listening in the car. That you could put these into a little kit, put them in the car, and go driving down the road. And what do I want to listen to? I got my 15 cassette tapes right here.
But when you're manufacturing vinyl, and then the record label says, "We're going to do cassettes," did you have any interest? Like, do you feel the same way back then about cassettes as we do, or a certain generation says, "Here's your CD," or the cool vinyl, and everybody wants vinyl?
I'm sure Dan would feel the same. We just felt more, the attachment was to our music and to our songs.
Rather than format.
And for me, it didn't bother me at all when this new thing
Seemed like
came.
your attachment was more to the
when
jumpsuit.
this new thing
than the
called
vinyl.
cassette tape and the new thing called CD came along.
Yeah.
I just thought it was the future, and it was just another avenue, another way of. I was more worried about the creation of the songs and getting it out
So
there.
you had no attachment to coolness
No.
of the format.
No.
That's amazing.
Well, I mean, and here we have.
I'm not an audiophile at all, anyway.
No.
Never have been, no.
So, well, now here we have, and this is 8290 Rewind.
Can't remember what's on the cover.
That's and a cassette tape on the cover. That's Alan's newest album, right? A lot of great classic hits on here. I say this is one of my favorite albums of the past couple of years. It's excellent. But here I have the CD, but I do most of my listening to of this album right there. So there it is. In fact, this is where most of my Dan Hill music is now
phone.
as well, right there. And interesting because I'd say probably 4 years from now, you won't be putting these out at all,
No.
right? And in some ways that's amazing. In some ways that's great because it's as simple as, you know, record the music, it's digital, and then you can have an album out within hours of it being mastered if you really want to. We'll probably get to the point where that's within minutes, right? But there's no more sitting on the floor, kicking
Yeah.
back and reading those liner notes.
But it's all cyclical, though. I mean, if it does go that way and everything becomes digital, then people will start craving physical product in the same way I think they're now craving vinyl, to have that gatefold experience, to have those liner notes and all of that information. So it will eventually come back around. I mean, I guess the question is kind of how married are we to the fidelity? Because certainly the fidelity of cassettes was always terrible. And just to go back to vinyl, I
Yeah.
mean, you probably did the same thing. You know, you'd have only so much money in your allowance.
Yeah.
So you would buy, you know, the Pixies record, and I would buy this other record, and then I'd tape it for you, and we'd switch, right?
I never
That's how you
never
could-
did anything illegal like that. No.
Of course not. I was thinking hypothetically.
You admit that on television, Kim.
I can tell you this.
Yes, but yes.
For all the love of vinyl, for all the love that vinyl gets, I have a turntable at home and I do collect vinyl. I'm very particular about it. I actually want my Glass Tiger and my Dan Hill, especially the 80s adult contemporary stuff. I actually want that digital. I want that way. When I come to vinyl and I hear the pops and the grooves and everything like that, that's when I want jazz and kind of music that I enjoy a little more muffled. I don't know that I want my rock and roll muffled. I don't know
Yeah.
that I want my romantic ballads muffled. You know. So it's strange. I'm one of those people that has always embraced whatever the next thing is
Yeah.
and embraced it. I embraced digital just because of the fact I didn't have any more storage. You know what I mean? My house is only so big.
Yeah, I saved. I did PR for Smithsonian Folkways, which was the reason why I wanted to get in the music industry in the first place. Was I wanted to work for that label. I wanted to work for Leadbelly's label. I wanted to work for Woody Guthrie's label, and I wanted something prestige like that in my life. And so I saved every single album I worked, and there's like 200 and 300. And then also because I didn't throw out anything or I didn't sell anything while I was working for various labels, I had like every album from Smithsonian and Metal Blade. And so I thought one day somebody's going to want these CDs and it'll be my daughter. And then my wife said, "You're crazy. There's no way she's going to, how is she even going to listen to this stuff?"
Yeah.
And then that's when I realized that it is just, it's a waste. And then that's when I wholly embraced digital. I always loved digital. I always loved the idea of paying one price and having 47 million songs on my fingertips. And working in the music industry, I never wanted to dictate to people how they should be consuming music. I just wanted them to consume music. But I found, and I think the secret, the dirty secret of the music industry is that they would like nothing more than everybody to be on one format, so we can all figure out how to sell music.
I believe
again.
that. I believe that because what you have now, here's some numbers for you. Vinyl music in 2016 increased by 20%, right? But it's also the first time that digital outsold CDs during the Christmas season,
Right.
right?
But surely then they can't be listening to vinyl for the fidelity of it. It has to be, in my opinion, the novelty of it.
Yeah.
Nostalgia.
Right.
In my case, it's nostalgia. Like I said, I there's times when I put on certain records and it sounds old. It sounds old-fashioned. So it takes me back. It reminds me of putting on my headphones and listening to vinyl when I was a kid. So that's, for me, it's a nostalgia factor, right? But I mean, when it comes to your music, the two of you, like I said, I want to hear it. It's at its clearest, at its best.
Dan, do you
Both
can
of
you
these, by the
remember-
way?
Do you listen to vinyl?
I have
When's
to
the last
admit
time you put
that
a needle on a record?
I haven't put one on at my mom's place
Yeah.
because she listens to vinyl.
These are both my albums, and they're both usually hanging on my wall. They're artwork now. You know what I mean? And that's a great thing about vinyl is you can do that. You can buy the frames and hang them up, and that's what it's become. But when it comes to actually what I listen to, I've embraced digital. You know?
Yeah.
However, let me ask you, as an artist, is it the same thing? You know, to put down all this music and create it and put it out there and then release it and not have that physical copy? Is there anything lost in that? Do you feel a loss that you don't have something to hold and to?
Not really, because you still have the tangible song, which you can play on your guitar or on the piano,
Right.
and it's still coming down to the song. We say it's about the single song now,
Right.
but the song is more important than ever. So what I do is when I make a record, or vinyl or digital, I'm thinking just in terms of the songs, rather than having a physical specimen to hold on to.
Right.
And the idea of having the physical product now becomes a tangible merch item. That's it. The relationship between you and the live audience. I still find the audiences still embrace the idea of saying, you know, can I have this and will you sign it? I think that what we do is we don't really care if they found us digitally on that one song that was on, you know, Spotify or iTunes or whatever. Then once they come see you and you perform for them, I still think that they tend to want to go, now I want to have this because you can sign it and I can read. Like now we go back to that story. There's the tale of the CD. But I think the relationship between us and our songs is really just that. This is what I've written and I'm putting out there, and how you receive it is fine by me.
Did you have to make any changes being in a band, knowing that you're going from, 25 minutes each side or 40 minutes worth of music on vinyl to now when CDs first came out, you got to fill up 70 minutes worth of music? Did that put any pressure on you to realize, wow, this changes the perception of what the band is
Did they even give you a
about?
time?
I'm hearing this for the first time.
Yeah.
I never even thought about it. We just,
Yeah.
Well, how many songs? 12. Okay, great.
Okay,
Right.
yeah. Right,
Right.
because like on vinyl, you used to have like 8 songs, 9 songs.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden I bought,
That's where the double album
Yeah, I
came
kinda
from.
forgotten.
The whole reason
Yeah.
the double album came about was artists
artists
felt
had to
limited
come up
by
with
the time.
16 songs, 17 songs to fill up a CD, and it was like no wonder people thought that $27 for a CD was garbage when they
Outrageous.
just wanted the 5 really great songs, if that, and then 12 songs worth of filler.
Well, now there's something to be said there, okay? Because people have often talked about the changing record industry and where it's gone, and we blame a lot of things on digital, you know, and the lack of the item, and we're more in the singles era. A lot of people think we're in a singles era right now, where people are buying the singles because of the fact it's digital and there's so much of it, it's easy to access. But I've often said, and I do believe this, that I think that one of the reasons we're in a singles era is a backlash from the late 90s and early aughts. When singles weren't available, the record labels forced a full album on you. They raised the price when we had been paying, you know, $10 for vinyl and cassettes. CDs, which cost less to make than this, cost way more than this to buy. And then a lot of, I mean, we all know there were a lot of those bands in the 90s and early aughts that put out an album with the hit single that sounded nothing like the rest of the album. People bought that full album, got burned, got pissed, and said, not again.
And the record labels made tons of money. I mean, you think about the late 80s and even from like 87, like when Dire Straits came out with Brothers in Arms and sold 1 million CDs, and it was the first CD to ever do that kind of numbers. And then a couple of years later, you had NSYNC and Britney and Backstreet Boys and all of these like kind of, you know, back to the teeny bopper music of pop music selling 10, 20, 25 million CDs at $27 a pop. Yeah. That was a lot of money. And I look at the vinyl resurgence and say there's no way that you can sell Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA for $40 and not have a backlash in 3 years from now. And maybe that's what's going to happen with that tipping point of what's going to make everybody go on digital streaming services. What's going to allow everybody to just go. And it could be people don't want to spend maybe $40 on something anymore.
Well, there could be lifestyle considerations too. I mean, you know, think about the city that we live in. It's just Condoville. I mean, anybody who's ever tried to move with a huge record collection or a CD collection knows it's the biggest pain in the world.
Yeah.
You know.
That's why I said I've embraced digital, because I've got hundreds of albums and hundreds of CDs, and it got to a point where, you know, my house looked like a storage facility. You
Right,
know,
so
I love all the music, but
right. So you end up culling, and you keep the ones that are either were autographed to Alan's point, or just something that was the one you just can't part with.
Or in a prenup, you're like, you can take the vinyl. just I don't want it anymore. It's now your problem.
That's right.
But I mean, you know, there is something to be said about that, because when illegal downloading first came along, they weren't downloading full albums. It was people trying to get singles. And so what we've seen in that is, you know, especially with the rise of iTunes, is that it became people wanted the singles. I think that's one reason we're in a singles market, is a backlash to a time when people wanted them and could not get them. And so now it's this kind of overconsumption of getting those. And people going back and getting the singles that they used to have on 45s, right?
I don't see it going backwards. I think this is the future.
Yeah.
Again, I think vinyl's probably, there's a resurgence in vinyl from the novelty aspect of it. I think
you're right.
But I don't see kids caring about, you know, sequencing and concept albums and what's the tail of the tape right through. I think it has to be that and that and that and that. For now, I think you'll go inside them. There'll be a digital single, and somehow where we used to do this and read, they'll just do that, and they'll go in.
Like a virtual reality thing?
They'll go in and they'll get the artist will be there, or they'll get walked through the studio when they were there'll be something similar to how we were, you know, satiated with all the information that we got off of that. They'll somehow get it on the inside, I think.
But are they asking for that? Like, you know, you can go through the numbers.
You can actually get the digital stuff. You can actually get the liner notes from iTunes. When you download an album from iTunes, you can actually get the liner notes as if you're reading a vinyl album. I don't know how many people read those, though.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You get the music. I mean, you know, you can get it right on your phone. I don't know how many people go, well, let's go ahead and get those liner notes and read that too. Oh, it was produced by Eric Alper. I don't know how many people do that.
Maybe the older albums, and I think, when you dive into the numbers and you realize that, last year for the first time, catalog sales were beating new release sales. And that might just be because there were obviously more catalog releases or, albums that were available in the past than maybe in the future, than maybe in the present when, 20,000, 30,000 albums get released. And then you take a look at, vinyl sales are up and downloads are down. But, it's not that much. We can all say, oh, vinyl is back. And it's not that much money to be had. I mean, even
No, it's for the purists.
it's absolutely, and it's still more money than the ad basis of streaming services are. So vinyl is still making more money than, say, Spotify or Pandora or Apple Music, as long as you listen to it on the ad. But the subscriptions are doing really, really well. But it's interesting what you said about that, you can dive in. Maybe there's something when you're 15 years old and you hear about a great album like Fleetwood Mac's Rumors or Marvin Gaye or the Beatles' Revolver and say, I know that is a classic album and I have to dive into it and read those liner notes, as opposed to, does anybody really need to know what the #1 song is with the producer? I mean, maybe they do.
Maybe Wikipedia is the new liner notes.
Maybe.
I do know I do that. When I find a new album,
I do that.
like it.
I agree. I do that. I do that about movies, and I do that about music.
Do you ever look at yourself? Do you look up yourself?
Do you Google yourself?
Yeah. I've checked out
Any lies?
Google on Glass. Well, they always get my birthday mixed up anyway. But no, it's pretty accurate. Maybe it's lightweight. There could be more information.
Well, let me ask you guys this. As people who have been on, you guys have both been on vinyl and cassette and CD and now digital. Did you see an uptick in royalties when along came Apple and things like that, and people went back? Like I have all of your work on digital, right? Because yes, I have it on vinyl, but I wanted it on my phone. Did you see, like, all of a sudden over a course of a couple of years, there was all of a sudden this, like, oh, people are going back and they're getting Glass Tiger's greatest hits, or they're getting longer fuse. They're buying those now for their phones. Was there kind of a resurgence there?
I found a resurgence.
Yeah.
Yeah. I found that my songs were earning more money when the business changed.
Yeah.
And I have to assume that people are going back and downloading those old songs.
I do know that's what the industry wants, right?
Conversely, now, have you noticed the massive change since streaming has come along?
Yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's just unbelievable. I used to have, as I'm sure you do the paper trail that would, go out the door and there'd be a big, nice, healthy check attached to that. And now it could be 3 times as long, and it's like...
I hear that all the time. I hear from
Yes.
classic artists from
Fractions.
the 60s and 70s.
What
who
I hear
get
everybody
more
say-
media than anybody else that is working, going from $1 million a year in royalties to just under 50,000 in less than 3 or 4 years.
The thing I hear from artists all the time is a double-edged sword. They go, I can't complain in the fact that it's wonderful, in the fact that I'm getting heard by more and more people. It's helped concert sales because
Yes.
people are coming out.
That's really
It's
made a
helped
difference.
my audience grow, or new people find me because I'm on different playlists from streaming sites. And they go, but money-wise, it really shrinks.
Well, that's going back to that thing, I mean, who's on contemporary radio? It's in this little window here. So guys like Dan and myself and Tom Cochran and Brian Adams, we go back to come and see us, and a ticket costs this much, and hopefully you'll pay for it. And then once you're in there, we offer you this and merch items, and that's how we make our living. Because you can't. I've sort of given up on the whole idea. I was with Johnny Reid just last week, and we were talking about this new project, and you're already predicting, well, you can kind of forget the idea of nobody's going to get rich off of that end of it, but hopefully this end of it, which is, much more like I'm saying, like merch and whatnot. That's what we have.
It's an
left.
interesting cycle, because I noticed that up-and-coming artists say, I make all my money off touring, right? And then maybe there's the hit albums and records for a while and radio airplay and things like that. And then the longer you're in the industry, it becomes, well, I make my money off of touring.
Yeah.
I heard Elton John recently complain about ageism in the music industry, where he says, I'm doing some of the most acclaimed music I've ever done, but because of ageism, I'm not getting played on the radio as much. And I go, that's always been the music industry when you think about it. And so, yeah, it's like when you start off as an artist, it's all about the touring and the merchandise. And then the longer you're in the business, it's about the touring and the merchandise.
Exactly.
You know, but I agree with you. Like when we talk about this, you know, we talk about the physical item. I may have your album, you know, on my phone. That's where I listen to it in the gym and in the car or whatever. But, you know, would you sign my phone? Would you sign my phone, Alan? That would, you know. But I'm going to go to the show and I'm going to buy, you know, the souvenir album and hopefully get the autograph and things like that. It is true that, you know, people still want something from an artist. I do believe that. I do believe when they come see you live, people still want something, whether it's a poster, a T-shirt, physical copy.
From an established artist. But one of the interesting things about digital is that it has leveled the playing field for everyone. I mean, it used to be if you were an independent artist, it would be very difficult to be able to get your music out there, you know, absent a record deal or a promoter with a very, you know, eclectic or strong booking policy. Whereas if I'm a kid and I'm living in, you know, a tiny little town in northern Ontario, and if my music is great and I find a way of getting it out there, first maybe through YouTube and then, you know, broader channels, I have a real genuine opportunity to get it out there whether someone at a record label wants to work with me or not.
Yeah, I love that, and I love that concept. Even though that everybody's competition is now the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and Leonard Cohen, and everybody else that was great. That's your competition for the exact same eyes and ears as everybody else does. But it's interesting what Kim said though, because people forget that these are industries and economies that are built whenever a new format gets developed.
Yeah.
When we were growing up, it was a big deal to be in a band and have a cassette. But if you really wanted to make it, you needed a CD.
Yeah.
Like that's when you were really, really serious. And now that you can record in your bedroom, master it, mix it, release it that night, and upload it through 450 digital sites, I can't imagine how much music Kim Hughes must have access to do reviews for or critique when it's so easy to reach somebody like her and say, I have an album. It's like, well, good for you. So does 43,000 other people that you know.
Is that true? Are you getting bombarded with a lot more music?
No, just from me. Please give review my music.
I mean, it is true, but I mean, the other side of that is there's an art to publicity. Whether or not you're a publicist or whether you're just a guy who has a facility for tooting his own horn. I mean, some people are better at getting noticed than others. I mean, in sheer numbers, am I getting the same amount of stuff? You know, probably over the course of you know, when I was editor at Now Magazine, we used to get, you know, tons and tons of records or cassettes sent in. We still get lots of digital stuff now.
Sure.
But it is, you know, the sort of self-promotion aspect is kind of interesting, and I love this comment that you made about, you know, competing with the Beatles and competing with the Rolling Stones. And just to go back to something that you said, Ward, that I think is so spot on, there was a lot of resentment, I think, that fomented around, you know, people feeling like they had to change over from vinyl to CD. And there were so many things that, you know, I just remember distinctly, and this is a throwback, like we'll never maybe live through this exactly the same way, or maybe we will, we'll see. But it did feel like you were being herded by the record industry to do this thing. It's like if you didn't replace your entire vinyl collection, you're going to be the guy who had nothing to talk about at a cocktail party. You know, you just couldn't keep up with everybody else. And I think there was a kind of a backlash against that. I think anyone who bought the Primitive Radio Gods CD definitely felt the backlash of that. You know, great single, terrible, terrible CD.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
or even like, you know, forcing people to buy cassette singles, which was like, looking back,
$4 as opposed to $10.
the dumbest idea
That's
possible.
yeah.
Like, it's one thing when you have an 8-track cassette or an 8-track player and like you hear, you know, ba da 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 da, and, you know, that was irritating enough as a 7-year-old. But, well, actually, I was probably the most irritating thing as a 7-year-old. But hearing that and then like realizing that I had to flip over a cassette.
Yeah.
And you're right, $4. We were selling tons of them at the record store.
It's an interesting thing to see. Now, we've talked about the changing format and what that means to the artist, to the audience. let's talk for a second about changing technology and the artist, okay? So let's go back to this. This cost a fortune to make. Not just the vinyl album and the pressing. I'm talking about the studio time, the musician pay, the time spent with a producer, all that time. You've released a lot of stuff straight to your website digitally since then. How much does that cost compared to what this cost
Well,
to make?
they cost a lot less now
Yeah.
because you can do so much stuff in your own house. I could go down to my basement into my bathroom and start knocking out vocals at 3 in the morning,
Yeah.
engineering vocals myself, so I'm not incurring any costs.
Right?
So you can make records for a lot less money now.
Yeah. But I mean, I guarantee you this cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to make, right?
Well, to be honest, no. Back in 1977, we recorded, you bring in a band and you would cut 3 to 4 songs a day. And within a week, you had pretty much a finished, within 3 weeks, you'd have a finished record. I think that probably cost me about, it probably cost about $20,000 to make.
I'm impressed. I'm impressed it was that low.
We entered in, I mean, Thin Red Line was like $500,000, right?
Really?
Oh, yeah.
And that was just
Yeah.
on catering.
So,
How much like that would you say?
Right.
oh, that probably costs about 300,000 maybe.
Yeah.
What costs more, Thin Red Line?
Well, Thin Red Line was, there was more tentacles with Thin Red Line, more videos and
Yeah, sure.
a lot more costs incurred via the
Yeah.
record company and
Well, I
And you
think
just
a lot
had
of
a
people
thin
don't- I
red
think-
line
the big
to
launch,
aim for rather than there.
buy on
you had a huge
tours
diamond
and-
sun.
you pay. We came in the age of payola and the buy-on tours and remember about quite a few years ago they released the Beatles, one of their greatest hits, on CD, and I remember a friend of mine buying it, and then they were yanked off the shelves because, if I'm not mistaken, in the depths of the original Beatles contracts, there was no mention of CDs.
Right.
Yeah.
So the Beatles were saying yank it until we renegotiate it.
Sure.
Well, of course, there was things in contracts for these things for breakage,
Breakers. There still is.
right?
There still are.
There's, even in the digital age,
Yeah.
they managed to still fire this thing
Just
in.
in case if that file breaks.
So for those
while
of
you're-
you, so many of these got broken when they were on the trucks. So the record companies would come along and say, well, 10% of them we're writing it off as breakage, and then they could keep that going for cassettes and CDs, which was getting more ridiculous. But it's still in contracts. to
Are you
this
saying that
day.
record labels were purposely ripping off
No.
artists? Is that? Are you
Alan
saying
Frew.
on
Scandalous.
live
Impossible.
television right now? No.
So Alan, which one of these costs more money to make?
Oh, this one,
Yeah.
by far.
Right.
I
So
probably did this one for, I don't know, 30 grand or something like that.
Yeah.
maybe.
But I mean, that's the amazing thing is that in some ways, as much as we can bemoan, technology, streaming services, maybe the royalties aren't as high or whatever, at the very least, we can say the costs have come down significantly. Now more than ever is a time when they may not want to be, but an artist can be their own record label. They can be their own production studio. I remember in the early 80s, the idea of someone having their own home studio was crazy. That was a really expensive venture, and
Yes.
now every other artist has his own home studio.
Right.
But they can say that because they had that.
Yeah.
Like, it's one thing if you're a brand new artist and you have the ability to have your own home studio and put out your own digital files, and it's something like 96% of all music available on Spotify has been listened to once.
Yeah.
And out of that, then like the other percentage is like 1/10 of the rest of it has been listened to like less than 100 times. But you can't feel the love and the goodness of making an album for $30,000 and making it profitable unless you go through the $1 million record deals and going to crack the US, I think like Dan did, or Glass Tiger, or Honeymoon Suite, or all these bands that are still the Grapes of Wrath, 5440, Trooper, you know,
Sure.
Randy Bachman. It's still a little bit of a viable occupation for them, and they can rely on touring because they went through that.
Yeah.
If you're an independent band right now, there's no place for you to play and crack, unless you're like rock and roll straight ahead. Forget it.
Yeah,
If you're
Legacy
CHR,
certainly,
you know, forget it.
certainly in my age group and genre, and Legacy is what you hang your hat on. We like
Is that new?
Glass Tiger's working on a project right now. I'm not sure how much I can divulge, but we're basically taking some of the music that we're known for, and we're changing the genre of it.
Nice.
And we already know that the people who, or we feel we're on the right track, the people who know us already and love us for these songs, they'll get a great kick out of this, right?
Yeah.
But the genre that it's going into, there's an abundance of places to go perform it. Now, a guy like Bob Lefsetz, I'm sure we're all right. Lefsetz, one of several things. I mean, I read him all the time, and he's spot on with a lot of things that he talks about. But he pisses a lot of people off, and we know that just for effect. And he'll write people off. Well, you were just has-beens, and you're not attached to what's going on today, contemporary. So therefore, you don't rate.
Right.
Meanwhile, that artist might be out there making a small fortune, as these young guys are not. They don't have a pot to piss in. That's
Well,
right.
he loved to rag on, like, how come Eric Clapton will put out a record and not do anything exciting, or where's the hit Paul McCartney? It's like, he doesn't need it.
Exactly.
They don't need it because there's no place to play. So you play within the field that you're in. You're not moving things to this. Look, when you were both around, and I would say this probably for you, because you were actually in a style of music that was relatively new for a great deal of people. When I was growing up,
Sure.
it was you and Duran Duran and Flock of Seagulls and and Blondie and all of these.
Do you mean by that? Do you mean like a pop rock that was kind of electric influenced?
Absolutely, yeah. Like you can actually say for a lot of people that like bands like you, and we're almost year zero for a lot of our entry point into pop music, and so you look at that and you say, well, the center moved to you, because you were influenced by maybe bands that were, maybe 10 years ago that maybe were on the offskirts of things, whether it was punk music or The Cure or other new wave artists. But you moved the center to all of you.
Yeah.
When you're Eric Clapton, Paul McCartney, if Phil Collins put out a new album, if Rod Stewart puts out a new album, if Van Morrison puts out a new album, where do they go except to play?
Yeah.
They're not on the radio. Nobody's caring about watching their new video on there. So I think what you're doing is actually really brilliant.
Well, I mean,
You're going to the audience rather than trying to figure out how the audience can come to you.
But at the end of the day, aren't both of you live acts? I mean, you're great in the studio, both of you, and you're both very technical artists. I know that about you both. But I mean, deep down, you both still like to tour. You like to perform live. Right? At the end of the day, is that the ultimate goal, more than whether it's digital or vinyl? Is the ultimate goal being in front of people?
It is for me.
Yeah.
Because again, though we're being underpaid with streaming, it does really help in terms of live shows, and especially on a world stage where you can get asked to play places right around the world, because they're streaming you in the Philippines, for example.
So you just got back from touring the Philippines
Right.
and everything, and I know you tour all over the world. Outside of North America, is the physical product popular? Are people buying CDs still outside of North America, or is it just as digital as the rest of the world?
Well, I mean, we haven't played outside in a long time, but just from going over there as even a tourist or whatever, I find that it's universal. It's digital, and you'll still get people who are hanging on to vinyl, and people wondering when CDs are going to vanish completely, and just all the things that we've been talking about tonight. I think is pretty much universal.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you'd disagree with that, but
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing to look at, like I said, the numbers. This past year was the first year that digital outsold CDs. As much as people have been talking about the death of CDs for years, they've actually been outselling digital consistently until the past year. And recently, they've had a little bit of an uptick, just as vinyl has. I actually think that's because so many artists are so prolific with their touring. I really do. I think it's that physical product, like you talk about, the merchandise that
Right.
people buy. Because we're seeing record stores I say, but physical brick and mortar stores are closing, right? And yet CDs somehow are upticking. So I think that goes to show you that people are buying the product, but they're probably buying it live more than they're buying it from the artist.
I think so. I mean, that little, this one here, it's only seen the light of day when it travels with me.
Yeah.
It comes with me, and then if there's 20 people or 200 or 2,000 people, then you're starting to notice that it becomes, no matter what you've got, get some T-shirts and some hats and whatnot. This is always, and it's the same for Glass Tiger, and I'm sure Kim Mitchell would say the same, and Dan and Tom. The CD always seems to be the one that they have to have. If it was a T-shirt or a CD, they're grabbing the CD.
Yeah.
Sure. So
It's definitely going to last longer than the T-shirt, most likely.
right.
Yeah,
Right.
but it also, we're also in a little bit of uncharted territory where, when people used to make fun of the Rolling Stones for still touring in their 50s, and when are you going to give it up? But nobody would ever say that to B.B. King or Buddy Guy. Nobody would ever say that to the best bluesmen of our time.
Well, I remember people made jokes about the Monkees touring in the 80s. They would go, oh my God, how old are they now? I look at it,
Yeah, Mickey's
Right.
younger
still
than
there.
me, younger than I am right now.
And now you have all these artists, like whether you're Glass Tiger, or whether you're the Pixies, or Tears for Fears, and Hall & Oates. I mean, they've never gone off the road. Canada is full of these heritage artists, but they're touring more, but they're recording less.
Yeah.
And I don't know from an artist perspective if you have a burning desire to still create. I certainly hear a lot about we're not going on the road until we have something new, knowing full well in your deepest heart of hearts.
Play your hits.
Play your hits.
Well, I remember a great story. I was fortunate enough to meet Paul McCartney, and the night that I met him, one of the things that was happening backstage in his dressing room was Capitol Records were presenting him with, I think it was double platinum, 200,000 copies at the time. And I know for a fact that it hadn't gone anywhere close to that.
Right.
But they figured it out so that it would be like they papered it. And yet, so here he was, couldn't really sell 200,000 albums in Canada, but he could put 53,000 people for 2 nights back to back. And
Yeah.
what was
It's like
the
social
sky
media.
dome?
When somebody has 100,000 followers, but then they
Right.
sell 4,000 copies. It's like,
Right.
who's buying what? Who's following
Yeah.
who?
But that's another story entirely. That's an interesting thing about the putting out a product and yet touring. So recent studies show 35 to 37 years old. That's the age you stop acquiring new music or trying to find new music. They say right around the age of 35 to 37 years old, that's when you just go back and listen to all the stuff you grew up on those 37 years prior, right? So that's why so many artists can tour forever, and the people coming, even as they're getting older, they want to see those old songs that they grew up with, right? They may buy the new stuff, but what they really come for is the hits. But not even the hits, but so much as just the stuff they grew up listening to. People really do want that.
And there's been some innovations in that too. Groups like, Motley Crue specifically, took over this whole concept of Vegas, and they realized that by installing themselves into the Hard Rock Casino or wherever they were for a week, they could have a much grander stage presentation than they could if they had to pack it up every night and drive it to the next town. So again, we talk about it being cyclical. I mean, you think about old school Vegas and the Dean Martins who would do shows, and then suddenly the rock bands are starting to do it because they can have more elaborate theater productions. And people will go, like people will actually fly, or cruise as you see them, these rock and roll cruises that are hosted by, whoever.
Zach Wilde and all these metal bands.
Yeah, yeah.
And
People
just
will
think of
go.
think of the product they can move over those
Yeah.
5, 6, 7 days.
I bet it's staggering,
Now-
especially with a captive audience.
One of the things that has gone down over the years, we talk about streaming, those royalty checks coming down. Here's something that's gone down. You and I have talked about this before. and that is now more than ever we're in a period of fewer gold and platinum albums because they haven't figured out how to track it.
And we brought the numbers way down, right?
Yeah, it used to
Gold
be
in Canada was
100,000.
50,000, platinum was 100,000. It's nowhere near that now, right?
No, gold is 40,000 and platinum's
40,000.
80,000.
Yeah,
Oh,
I used to my first like number of years in the music industry. I had gold albums coming in every month.
Now, part of
Now,
that, there is
like
something to be
the
said
last
about.
couple
Part of that
years-
was they were manipulated. We've all heard this story about the label that managed to ship 100,000 copies of a record that didn't sell 20,000 copies.
Right.
We've all heard those stories.
I mean,
or it was included in a in a tour ticket or something like that, where they were able to go platinum album.
That's why it's never based on sales rather than ships, right? Because
Right.
somewhere there's a warehouse stocked full
That's where my
of
albums are.
albums.
That was the joke, right? Ship gold, return platinum.
Right.
Yeah.
Somebody once told me, and I don't know if it's true, and I tried to find out if it was, but somebody used to work at Capitol Records in the 60s in Canada, and they asked him, after like 30, 40 years worth of being in the business, what was the biggest bomb you've ever had? And they said the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper. Because
Wow.
the stakes were so high with that record that they shipped out so many of them that they needed to just prove that it was selling and selling and selling, and gold albums coming in like frisbees from around the world, but it didn't actually sell.
Yeah.
But it did sell, but not nearly as much as those like tractor trailers sitting in the parking lot of a record
Well,
store, though.
we've all heard the stories of the Kiss solo albums, right? The Kiss solo albums all went platinum, but you don't know anybody that has all 4 Kiss solo albums.
Only the Ace Frehley. That's the only one that legitimately sold.
Right? And but they
James
all
Simmons,
shipped
you
platinum.
can send all hate mail
right?
care of Ward Anderson.
Now let me ask you, it's a classic rock and roll story. The Kiss solo albums, 4 solo albums released all in one day, and it's they're all platinum albums, but the rumor has always been, well, they shipped platinum, right? So, if you were to ask the members of Kiss, in each of their autobiographies, they have different stories about how many of those albums sold, right? So, but let me ask you guys this, okay? So we have each of you producing your own music now, in recording in your own spaces or whatever. If someone came along and offered you your first record contract again right now with a major label, would you take that contract?
Would depend on what they were offering as part of the deal.
Right.
I would certainly consider it.
You would consider
Yeah.
it. You'd still go with the major label,
If I thought that they had the clout behind them
right?
to really promote the album, I would consider it. But on the other hand, because of my age, the likelihood of getting on pop radio is almost nil.
Right.
So I'd have to consider it very seriously, because what happens is you end up having your own little mini industries yourself, where guys like Alan and myself and Cochrane and are making our own albums, keeping the cost down, and selling them after our concerts, and actually having a pretty good cottage industry doing that. So the idea of giving that up for a major label may be a mistake. It would depend
Right.
on how much they were offering.
Sure. Alan?
I'll use Johnny as an example.
Johnny Reed?
Yeah. So, knowing what I know now and what he's achieved, just the industry of sort of do-it-yourself, I would probably follow in his footsteps and go after it in the manner that he's been successful with. But that's only because I know all the answers now, and I've seen all the pitfalls. I mean, there was a lot of magic in signing with Capitol Records and signing out
Legendary label.
Yeah, and signing out Manhattan and New York, and having the clout and the power of a major label. And I think the only reason I would probably say I wouldn't do it is simply because I can't clear my mind. I know all that now. And so if I was being asked to take a big record contract from a major publisher or a major label today, knowing all the information I have, I would say I wouldn't do it. If I was a young artist and I was trying to mentor, I'd probably tell them all the reasons why I think they just don't need it. That being said, if I could clear my head and, you know, think with the innocence of what these young guys are feeling today, I can understand why they would still do it. Because there's still something, right, Dan, they still are Universal, and they still are Warner Brothers, and they still are, you know, Sony. And so I can understand why an unsigned, a young artist, because they have great clout and great reach. And
if you have
great
one
reach.
shot at the brass ring, right? You need that label behind you.
Yeah.
In so much that, you know, as Kim was saying, that it's a level playing field, and I totally agree with that. But Katy Perry needs to be on Universal.
Yeah.
You know, Bieber, The Weeknd, Drake, they need to be on a major label in order for the rest of the world to hit the button and go worldwide and say, this is the very best that we have to offer in the world. It's kind of like being a baseball player and being in the major leagues.
Sure.
You know, they might, for all intents and purposes, the way that their business structure might leave a little bit to be desired. But you want to break worldwide, there's very few labels that are independent that
Well,
can do that.
we can talk all we want about everyone can be their own producer, their own artist, their own label, and that's true. That is true. But no matter how technologically advanced the entertainment industry goes, people go towards the traditional route a lot, okay? With television, you may have a web series, but if a network wants you, you go, right? You may release a movie straight to video, but if a major studio comes along and says, we'll put you on the big screen, you go. And if a major label comes signing, most artists will go. I mean, and you know, we look at label, we say label, major label meant that was literally the people that pressed the label that went on the record. That's where the term label comes from, right? So how far are we, and this is our final thought on this, how far are we from a microchip that you just get implanted right in here to your brain, right there, and I'm listening and I want to go to the next song and I just kind of blink this eye, or if I want to go back, I go back to that eye, right?
well, that's what I was meaning when I was talking about
Virtual reality?
something will come along that will allow the kids to go inside.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was talking about.
Well, I know that you will all be there. Thanks for joining me, panel.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, this has been the final episode of Offstage with Ward Anderson for Season 2. I do hope you join me for Season 3, and I want to thank my special guests, Alan Frew, Kim Hughes, Eric Alper, and Dan Hill. And my friends, when the show is over, we always hope you join the conversation offstage. Good night. That's it.